What's going on, GenCon? This is Ted from Immersion, and I am here. We're going to be talking with Penny Arcade. So I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about Acquisitions Incorporated, the official Wizards book. So, Elyssa, why don't you?
My name is Elyssa Grant, and I am a producer at Penny Arcade. And on the book, I produced it and was one of the creative directors on it, alongside Jerry Hawkins and Scott Fitzgerald Gray.
Hi, my name is Kiko Villasenor. I'm the design director at Penny Arcade, and I was an art director on the book.
All right. So, Acquisitions Incorporated, we just have the bags 10 years, right? Been around for a while. And before the idea of, or the possibility of going with an official WotC product, were you guys looking to do something like this on your own, outside of that? And then how did things come about being, starting with WotC?
Yeah, so we originally had planned to be doing a book for a while, and the original idea was to do a Kickstarter for it. And so we were getting a Kickstarter prepped, and we were talking to WotC about it as well. And then as we were talking more and more to WotC, they said, well, why don't we just partner together and create something official through D&D and Acq Inc. So that's how it came to be.
And, obviously, we just talked a little bit beforehand. Acq Inc. has its own kind of style and its own branding, and slightly different than I feel some of the official Wizards products. But it clearly shows that was maintained throughout the design process. But what were those meetings like? How did that go? Like, how can we keep this being, Jim and Omen and Viari while still being within official published products?
Okay. So Penny Arcade is built on our comic, which is obviously largely in that comic style. And so our goal was to bring the world of Penny Arcade and Acq Inc. Into D&D. And so our thought there was, why don't we maintain the high fantasy art style of WotC's Dungeons and Dragons with the larger pieces, so any of the half-page and, it's just the half-page pieces are all in the high fantasy style, while anything lower, so anything that was a third of a page or smaller, would be in the Penny Arcade comic style. Mm-hmm. And that was our way of merging it while keeping it fairly consistent throughout the book.
Like the bag says, we have 10 years of Acq Inc., and that has a certain style and a certain look to it, and we've generated a fandom that is used to that look. Sure. And the official book, we felt, really need to have a bit of that flavor in it. Elyssa is right. We do have plenty of high fantasy pieces in the book that is more traditional for a Dungeons & Dragons book, but there is definitely some touches of Acq Inc. in them.
And so how long was the process to start from, I know we just published in June, is officially out there everywhere, but how long was the process from start to that point?
I would guess it took about a year and a half. I'm trying to think back because we had a lot of original discussions about the concept of the book, the layout, how exactly we wanted to format this book, and that changed along the way quite a bit. But I would say from soup to nuts, it was a year and a half, with the large portion of it being done with about 9 months of that.
Okay. And obviously stuff's got to get cut. Was there anything that you guys both saw that you wish had made it in that ended up having to get cut that you could maybe talk about, or is that something, whether it be art, content, any of that kind of stuff?
There's a couple of art pieces that we did end up cutting just because when you go to lay out a book, there's going to be, you can't fit everything in it. Right. There is, I think, 2 pieces of art.
I can just think of one right now.
Just the one, okay. Yeah. But we're utilizing that in an additional offering. So you'll eventually see it. It's not gone forever.
Okay. Very cool. So, all right. So what's your favorite part of your favorite piece, favorite section of the book? I know that's probably a little hard to put you on the spot to ask you, but.
Gosh, I'm trying to think of all of the pieces and which one's my favorite, but there are so many different styles and artists that we worked with that just brought so much flavor to it. We worked specifically with Aviv Orm, who brought so many of the iconic positions through Acq Inc. to life, and a lot of those are just, from her imagination. And so she did a phenomenal job bringing that dark office comedy to into something that was just very silly, and also in a way that every single character had a personality that you could just see right from looking at the pieces. So working with Aviv was pretty phenomenal. I'm trying to think. There was one called it's the zombie horse fight, where there is a shadow of a zombie horse over an adventurer. And I remember when we first saw that, we all just thought it was the funniest thing, just because she portrayed it so perfectly.
My favorite piece is probably Aviv's rendering of the occultant, which is one of the positions in Acq Inc. It's one of the player options in the book. And it is a tiefling with a great expression on her face, and she's holding her implement for the occultant, which is, what is it called?
An occultant. It was an occultant.
In an occultant. Okay, so imagine an abacus with skulls for the numbering implements. And I think that pretty much encapsulates a lot of Acq Inc. and what's in this book, because it's just an awesome picture, but it's also hilarious at the same time.
I just remembered a really good one, the Peg and Hook shop piece, too, that Aviv did. So there's a shop, obviously, in the book that you can go and buy these basically pirate accessories. But the keeper has a peg for a hand and a hook for a foot. And something as simple as that and subtle as that was absolutely perfect. It's awesome.
Another piece, one of the high fantasy pieces that has the original Acq Inc. characters in it, the A-Team, like we call them in the office. I don't know if we really technically call them that outside of the office. Yeah, the A-Team. But it's in super high fantasy style of the A-Team fighting a mechanical beholder.
Is that the one where Viari's looking at that? I love that one.
That is like a quintessential piece of the book as well.
So I guess while we're talking about the A-Team and the people involved in that, so obviously you guys work with Jerry regularly, obviously, but how was it working with him on the production of putting all of his thoughts into like a book form? Was the process any different? Was he better or worse of a boss putting together the book?
It was hugely a collaborative effort. So we would sit in meetings and just talk about, well, what is important to Acq Inc? We had to really zoom out and take a look at, well, what would people who are fans think of this book, and what would people who are new to this book also think of it? So we had to approach it in a very interesting way. And so working with Jerry was such a blast, and he brought obviously so many amazing ideas that this book would not be what it is without the vision of Jerry and Mike.
Of course.
And Kiko, obviously. And everyone in the office is so familiar with Acq Inc. that we all kind of, we had these conversations that made it into what it is, and we all had say in it as well.
I mean, it actually wasn't that different than other Penny Arcade projects. A lot of, like, Elyssa and I and the rest of the employees at Penny Arcade were sort of like, Mike and Jerry have the big ideas and the great ideas, and we're essentially their hands and feet. We're the ones who execute. So working with Jerry on this book was not much different in that respect. Like, he had the high ideas, the big concepts, and he let us distill those down and execute them in a way that fits his vision. And Jerry's also great in the fact that he loves to collaborate. So whenever we have like a slight tweak to his idea, like, he's totally on board.
Awesome. Well, I think we're coming up to the end of the video. So if there's anything you wanted to tell people about this book or about Penny Arcade in general, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. You go first.
Okay. Basically, it's a great book for players because traditionally your home base for your party is typically just a place that you go to rest in between adventures. This book gives you a whole framework for turning that home base into a structure, an entire, almost its character in and of itself that you can level. And you can hire minions to do stuff for your franchise, which is what it's called in the book. So I think that's a really big selling point for it, is that it gives you a ton of options and a ton of things to do in between your regular adventures.
Anything to add?
Yeah, to jump onto that, the beauty about this book too is that you can plug it into whatever campaign you are already running, and so everything that is in this book, for the most part, other than the campaign, if you're already running your campaign, can sit on top of what it is that you were doing. So you have a new position that's being introduced that sits on top of your class and your race, and it just adds flavor and it adds more of a collaborative spirit to the table itself. So we're really excited to see the stories that come out of this at home games. We're excited to see the world that other people create, and then we're also excited to introduce more options for the future. So as Kiko said earlier, one of the pieces that didn't make it into the book will soon be seen. So we already have a lot of things coming up that's planned that we're excited about.
Well, that's very exciting. So yeah, I've been working to try to get a group together so we can play through and stream and record the adventure that's in the book itself. But I'm also thinking about taking the class system, because it is, again, it's not just Penny Arcade, it's not just Acq Inc, it's not just Forgotten Realms, it can work in any campaign.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about importing that into my own game to add more to it. As you said, I gave the party a base, but it's just a place they go to, and then they leave. So now I want to make that real, I want to expand upon that, and this seems like the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, I was talking about the occultant earlier, and you can be a paladin occultant. You can be a warrior occultant.
Sure.
So it just fits right in.
So thank you guys so much for your time. I'll
Thank you.
shake your hands here, and I'll see you guys at the next interview.
Thanks so much.